And our next speaker, Professor Christine Perakslis, who's an adjunct at Johnson & Wales University and also imminently at Arizona State University, and a consultant, will now present her plenary session to all of us. I've known Christine since about 2004 or 3. The late Robert Walk and Christine were responsible for writing one of the first papers on national security and different forms of identification, alluding to the potential for uberviolence before the term was even coined. So over to you, Christine, as I stop sharing. And thank you to Roger, Steve, and Michael.
Thank you so much, Katina. Thank you for joining us today on this webinar that has been so wonderfully hosted by AAG. It is not lost on me the honor we are afforded to have 3 gurus of the major categories of valence with us today, all together. These men have been towering heights. I'd also like to draw your attention to the special acknowledgements, because these people too have been redwoods in the forest of mining out the implications of technology. And some of them have also been part of the research I'll show today. So my chat is on what happens when there is a convergence of these valences. We'll look at benefits and we'll look at risks. Although there may be far more sophisticated models of the valences that we could have utilized today, one such model that we could have used was developed by our very own Steve Mann. And if I have time, I'll put it up on the screen at the end, and maybe he can do a deep dive during the December meeting. But what I want to show here is this model seemed most appropriate, not just because the 3 valences of our gurus are so well represented, and not just because the 3 seminal authors of this model are also with us today, Katina Michael, MG Michael, and Roba Abbas, but because, in my humble opinion, this model allows us 3-4 key takeaways straight away. One is ubervalence is at the center of the model. This is that inside sensor view listening we just heard MG describe, listening to the inner sanctum of the human. And the model, in my opinion, allows us to feel the centrality of the inner sanctum. Next, you can begin to somewhat understand that there is a proximity, at least in the physical realm, there's a proximity to the watching relative to that inner sanctum. Additionally, you can play with the intensification or the amplification of the watching when you opt into one valence. A few caveats. One is this model does not seek to represent all of the valences. We heard other valences being mentioned. 2, this model does not seek to represent itself as like a classic Venn diagram. So, for example, all surveillance is not a subsection of surveillance. And lastly, we may purport or contend that data valence has now extended so far. It may be now the backdrop upon which all of these valences are operating and happening. But we'll maintain the integrity of this particular model. And what I want to do is first start with a quick example in the healthcare sector. Then we will quickly transition over into the geo sector and hang there for the rest of the chat. So you can see here, I've shaded in the ubervalence section. That's that closest to the inner sanctum of the human. My dad is in his 80s. We are facing the same issues that most of his cohort are facing: physical changes, cognitive changes, etc. One of the things that Dad may choose to do is ingest a wireless endoscopic capsule. And by allowing that within his inner sanctum, he now has an element, a technology within him that maybe can see and hear and help with his health monitoring. I'm going to move to the next slide, and you see I've now expanded out to the surveillance section. Just by Dad ingesting that capsule, He's automatically, whether he realizes it, whether he can comprehend it, he is now surveilled. Because in the classic sense, his care team might be able to synchronously listen to the physiological inner sanctum relative to certain areas of his functioning. I, as his daughter, may be able to download an app and help with his pharmacological care. So, Dad, I see his metrics are a little off, and I say, geez, Dad, did you take your pills this morning? So he's opted in whether he understands that or not. Now moving out to the data valence, let's look at a little more nefarious scenario. Dad now, his care facility has been hacked. They're under a cyber attack, and they choose not to pay the ransomware. So Dad's data are leaked somewhere out there, and insurance companies pick this up, and his premiums go up. We'll stay with a little nefarious, and now let's go to the surveillance level. Poor Dad, I'm going to put him on the roadways, and he has an accident. And now this accident may, let's say his HIPAA rights are somewhat suppressed, his data become admissible in court, and they say, yes, you were in a physiological state of road rage, and that may be admissible. You can feel by dropping a pebble in the center of a pond how quickly those ripples can go out and lead to more watching at different levels. I was a little negative in that example. So let me give a positive example, moving away from the human, and then I'll move into the primary example that we'll look at. So SMAP, most of you that are in the geo sector understand this far more than I, but SMAP, that eye in the sky that is reading the salinity and the soil moisture across the planet. And we're mixing that together, using it in tandem with other technologies on the ground, using it to validate or not. And this could lead to wonderful advantages for society, such as improved weather forecasting and identification of flood-prone zones or drought areas, not only now, but with predictive analytics, we might be able to look in the near future and the far future. But this is a wonderful watching of the flora and fauna that we can see. But let's go to a scenario. For the healthcare scenario, I went from the inner sanctum of the uber valence out to the sky. So the inner sanctum out to the sky. But this, what I'd like to do is go from the sky to the inner sanctum. And I'll use the context that most of us are familiar with. Here in the United States, they suggest we spend 84 billion hours a year on the roadway in our automobiles. So LiDAR. If we take a look at LiDAR, it's already pulling together different levels of the watching. But now let's do geo software. And we're pulling in, and you see the slide picture, the bottom. This could be a wonderful software for municipalities to assess, let's say, this particular intersection, to see crowd analytics, conflict analysis, congestion issues. We might look at ingress, egress. We might look at the flora and fauna around egress and see overgrowth, or how the traffic congestion is negatively impacting the flora and fauna, or things as such. Wonderful things can be derived as we live and move and have our being within this infrastructure. But you can also feel, if I'm that automobile, that red automobile to the right of this analysis, somebody out there also could be watching wide swaths of my mobility. And you can feel that that could lead to privacy issues. So now let's go from the sky and more to that street view. So we're coming in from the sky closer to the inner sanctum. By the way, Texas is, here in this country, is actually doing this. We're taking the sky to the street view and adding in facial recognition. Some of our states have banned it. Texas is not one. So in some of these cities now we have the sensors on the poles, and this could be wonderfully advantageous, beneficial, in the sense that if one of my loved ones is meandering through this area with Alzheimer's, we can quickly ascertain the location and bring them to well-being. Maybe we have an Amber Alert, and this is wonderful to be able to quickly identify an abduction issue. But what if you ask me, to transport a friend of a friend, because I happen to go to the city every day and I drive to and fro. I don't agree with your friend or friend's ideology. I don't even know what it is. But now I may be aggregated in with an understanding of who they are based on some of the data that are picked up. And I think this is interesting. In a ruling of a case, the late Judge Scalia made a statement that I think is salient. And in this case of Antoine Jones, a person of color, law enforcement placed a tracking device not on Antoine's car, but on his wife's automobile. And it was lawfully done, but over the next 28 days, it became very problematic. And this is the quote by the late Judge Scalia. A person who knows all of another's travels can deduce whether he is a weekly churchgoer, a heavy drinker, a regular at the gym, an unfaithful husband, an outpatient receiving medical treatment, an associate of particular individuals or political groups, and not just one such fact about a person, but all such facts. So now moving into, you can see my graph on the top left, I'm moving closer to the inner sanctum, coming into the surveillance section. And you see that top left picture, wearables, bearables, mountables have become, for many, more affordable and smaller. We can buy these over the counter. And what we see is just by driving down the road, we can be surveilling one another. I didn't opt in to you videotaping me as I drive up I-95 alongside you, but I am being videotaped. And this was wonderful. Our very own Steve Mann brought this forward to society with counterveillance. And that was so essential for a robust society, that if a law enforcement member of society can videotape me, why can't I videotape that person videotaping me? And it allows for that robust democracy in some ways. But in certain contexts, it can lead to risk. If you look at the bottom right picture, this is a live feed from a Vermont roadway. And just by me commuting back and forth, you can log in at any time and see my movements. And this could be problematic because I didn't even know it was there. And we all can watch each other's habits. And we saw this with the bottom left picture. And you see, this is a clipping from a newspaper article post Hurricane Katrina, published. And the red dots are representing mortality points on this map. They were generalized to the 2-block radius. So there was some geomasking that was done, but unfortunately, journalists were able to take this clipping from a local newspaper and re-engineer it by driving through the neighborhoods. And I don't know if you remember the spray paint on the houses, and they were able to ascertain the actual house level of the mortalities. And this is problematic when we think of members of our society would say they're HIV positive. We would not want people to be able to invade that level of a person's inner sanctum, their home, say, their external inner, relative to re-engineering. Let's stay at the surveillance level, but I want to come even closer to the inner sanctum. I'm a Bostonian. I apologize for my accent already. Bottom right is a picture of a gal. Her panorama from her iPhone became very instrumental in the FBI quickly identifying the perpetrators of the bombing. She was just capturing her lived experience, not knowing what was coming, but all these other people around her were surveilled. They were opted in to this investigation just by sharing her lived experience with their own lived experience. And when we start to put this together, this could be of great advantage because we see that quick identification of a perpetrator. But now look to the left of that particular picture. And what we see is companies mining not our DNA, but our digital DNA, where they're able to really now use affective computing, AFFECTIVE, affective, the stuff of emotions and feelings, to really start to understand what MG referred to is the behavioral motivators, the why. So now it's not just where am I, for how long am I there, with whom am I there, but also what I'm feeling, what I'm emoting, what to capture that. And it begins to get a little closer to that inner sanctum. Then we add on not just facial recognition, but now we add on facial emotion recognition. And we're seeing this, there's a race now across companies. Deep Face has claimed now that the computer to human emotion expression analytics is better than human to human. They just have gone past that threshold. And many companies are improving in their accuracy week over week. And if you look at the top right-hand section of the slide, you see this can be done on continuums. It can be asynchronous over to synchronous. It can be one-to-one, like when you log onto your phone with your biometric. That's just me saying I'm me, or it could be one-to-many or many-to-many. It can be disaggregated, partially, or aggregated. It can be collected in an overt manner or a covert manner. But you can feel as we're moving towards the right side of those continuums, the risk may be getting greater. I want to mention too that Minneapolis in our country has banned the use of facial recognition, especially on the roadways, in large part because of social injustice. And what we've seen is, although the algorithms are getting better, back then there was bias in the algorithms against people of color, and in particular, Latino members of our communities and Black members of our communities. In addition, Black females on emotion expressed were rated far more towards anger, even if they were neutral. And that can lead to unlawful arrests, misunderstandings, real harm to members of society. So let's go back to the roadways and go inside the cabin of our car. And this company is now touting not just understanding the driver's state, but putting together visual, putting together voice, putting together text, putting together blood flow analysis of the face, and not just understanding the driver, but the occupants and the collective state of the cabin. So now we have context aware and context adaptive, where I look drowsy. Does the oxygen change within the cabin? And that would be a good thing so I don't fall asleep. But what happens now when it starts to smack of the stuff of ubervalence when we look at our automobiles, not just knowing where we are with whom, but how we're feeling with this facial expression analysis and the mood and emotion detection, the body key points, etc. So we wanted to know, as a group of researchers, what's happening? What are the risks if we truly are moving into IoTAP, or the Internet of Things and People? What are the risks across the sectors? If these processes of being watched are where we live, where we play, where we move, where we get healthcare, where we interact, what are risks that are transferable across multiple different scenarios? And using an ISO 31000 risk assessment model, it's an iterative process. We've been doing this, I want to say it's about 4 years now, that we looked at the literature, we did our own research studies, we wanted to see the models, and then collapsed our findings of, there are 6, probably maybe 7 buckets of risks that we identified, collapsed them into those 6, 7 buckets, and then started putting them out with the technologists and engineers and even newly minted engineers. What do you think? So just real quickly, if you look, the top left is the valence model that I had shown at the beginning. The bottom left is what the US DOA uses, very much concentric circles relative to physical security. Bottom center is brilliant work done by Gary T. Marks. And we loved his work on what happens when the human's privacy borders are violated. And after collapsing into these themes, we went back to this particular Marx's work and offered, with humility, maybe there's a new border in 2016 because of the increase of ubervalence technologies. Maybe we need to add a physiopsychological border that can now be very much violated. So here it is. These were our buckets, 6, maybe 7. So if we're looking at the convergence of the valences, as I suggest, then will technology be so insightful, much like the deep face example I gave you, will technology be so insightful, ubiquitous, continuously on, context aware, context adaptive, understanding, machine learning, deep learning? Will it know me better than the people around me or better than myself? Next is, what about this stuff of all of these processes being imperceptible? They're behind the LOV, the line of visibility. We don't know how they're intangible. So we don't know where they move, who they move to, et cetera. Next is an issue of incomprehensibility. And just think of terms and conditions. We presented to a group of researchers in Budapest, and one of the groups presented to us what designers and developers said about their own product. They said, we designed and developed this product, and we don't understand the terms and conditions that were written around this. We have no idea, but we know the product better than anyone else because it went to a legal team and it's all legalese. And then we've got this thing of mutability. You know, you log on and suddenly the terms and conditions have changed again. What about the average person who is trying to understand this? Then we have this stuff of indelibility. And, you know, Jeremy Pitt said something years ago that just really stopped me in my tracks, that humans have an ability to forget. It sounds so simple, but it's so profound. I don't think we'd have second and third children if we truly remembered what it was like delivering perhaps that first child. But we have the right also to be forgotten. I'm not that person anymore, that data. That's not me anymore. But how do we have this data erased? We don't even know where those data are, where they've gone, who owns them, third parties, companies got purchased, et cetera. Next is the invasiveness, and I think you feel that. Maybe a subsection of invasiveness becomes inaccuracy, or maybe that's a seventh category that we want to explore. And lastly, number 6 is that involuntariness, where I explained a little bit of that driving on the roadways. I didn't have the ability to opt in or not. In addition, sometimes I have to opt in. It becomes compulsory. Just by me, I started work at a new organization, and just by becoming gainfully employed, I had to merge up into the cloud multiple areas of my life that I would have preferred not to. So to close out, I do want to watch the time. I just want to give a shout out to the geo sector. I went through your AAG just rewrote this statement of professional ethics. Wonderful work. I want to say you really address the imperceptible issues of processes, the incomprehensibility, the involuntariness. Bottom of this this picture, you're getting better and better at geomasking, and I think that that's essential for to offset some of the invasiveness, the imperceptibility, et cetera, and the digital enclave. That's another way for you to protect the average citizen like me. So I'm a little out of time. I'll stop there in case there are any questions or comments. Thank you so much for your time. And this is Steve's model that I hope he has a chance to do a deep dive at another point.
Wow, Christine Perakslis. I've got messages pinging me from all over the place going, this is incredible this morning. And truthfully, it is. What a plenary, what a panel, and what an opening introduction. I'd like to bring back Jeremy Pitt, Steve Mann, Roger Clark, MG Michael, alongside Christine. Christine really dug into all facets of the valences. Any questions from the floor?